Thank you, Ambassador. Well, today is a very relevant event. It's a very relevant event for Aspen Institute Mexico. Despite the distance between Mexico and Ukraine and what is happening in that part of the world, we all know that the world has become smaller nowadays. And it is not only the size of the world, but the relevance of maintaining the international relations, the relevance of maintaining peace in the world, the relevance of keeping in the world the possibility to continue growing and of solving so many critical problems that exist and that war only makes things worse. Today, we have the privilege of having with us a very important panel, thanks to the partnership we have with Aspen Institute Kyiv. And therefore, I'm going to introduce who the panelists today are going to be, so that the purpose of this event is for Mexicans to be more aware and have a greater understanding of what's happening in the Ukraine conflict. Today we have with us Natalie Geresco, Chairperson of the Aspen Institute Kyiv Supervisory Board. She was Minister of Finance of Ukraine from 2014 to 2016. Natalie serves as the Executive Director of the Financial Oversight and Management Board for Puerto Rico, created under the bipartisan Puerto Rico Oversight, Management, and Economic Stability Act of the USA. Previously, she spent 2 decades working as Horizon Capital co-founder and CEO. She began her career in public service in the United States, serving in the State Department from 1989 to 92, then as Economic Section Chief of the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine from 92 to 95. Currently, she serves as a member of the Transatlantic Commission on Election Integrity. She's chair of the Board of Trustees of Aspen Institute Kyiv, non-resident distinguished senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, member of the World Economic Forum Global Future Council on Financial and Monetary Systems, board member of the Liavet Institute for International Development, advisory board member at the Lviv Business School at Ukrainian Catholic University, and patron of the Ukrainian Institute London. Natalia is making significant efforts to shed light on the acute issues of Russian invasion in Ukraine for the international community. As an expert, she pays special attention to the issues of isolation of the Russian economy, utilizing sanctions, trade and business boycott tools, as well as the strategy of recovering and reconstruction of the country and the possible sanctioning, financial, and other support of international matters. Thank you, Natalie, for joining us and for making this event possible. We also have with us Gennady Shizikov. Hope the pronunciation is correct. If not, you'll correct me. Gennady is an Aspen Institute Kyiv Supervisory Board member, president of the Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Gennady was born in Donetsk, studied at the Donetsk Institute of Trade from 81 to 85 at the Trade and Economic Faculty. In 1992, he defended his master's thesis in some time, a doctorate with specialty in foreign economic activity. He has over 80 published scientific and non-fiction articles. He completed fellowship at the Bradford School of Business, University College Cork, Ireland, Greater Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce, USA. Gennady Shizikov has contributed to the development of the chamber movement in Ukraine for over 20 years, From June 2002 to February 2014, he was president of the Donetsk Chamber of Commerce and Industry. From February 2013, Gennady has held the position of president of the Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And on May 19, 2015, he was re-elected as president of the Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. In this period, the following have been created and founded at the UCCI, a network of export support centers, the National Export Forum, bilateral business councils with partners from 30 countries. A number of agreements on cooperation were concluded with partner organizations. Thank you for being with us today. We also have the privilege of having today Andriy Sagorotnyuk. Andriy served as the Minister of Defense of Ukraine from 2019 to 2020. Previous to his appointment as the Minister of Defense, Andriy served as head of the Ministry of Defense's Reforms Project Office from 2015 to 2018. During this time, he was a key player and major architect of military reform in Ukraine. In July 2019, prior to serving as the minister, Mr. Sagorotnyuk was appointed advisor to the President of Ukraine for defense matters, as well as a member of the Supervisory Council of Ukraine's Ukroboronprom Defense Company. Mr. Sagorotnyuk has over 20 years of experience in the field of heavy industry and industrial engineering. From 2015 to 2019, he served as founder and chairman of the board for Discovery Drilling Equipment. He also holds degrees from the Taras Shevchenko National University of Kiev in law and a postgraduate diploma with distinction in the specialty of financial strategy from the Said Business School at the University of Oxford. Thank you very much, Andriy, for being today with us. We're very privileged to have you. And we also have with Julia Chikivska, Executive Director of Aspen Institute Kyiv. She has many years of management experience in educational institutions. Julia served as a vice president at Kiev School of Economics. She worked as head of the advisory group for our Ukrainian Minister of Economic Development and Trade. Julia is a co-founder of Bendukits Free Market Center. She is a civic activist in Ukraine and founder of the Open University of Maidan. Julia graduated in Atlas Leadership Academy and Kiev Mohila Academy. In 2018, Forbes selected her as a top 30 under 30 in Europe in law and policy field for her role in the building of civil society in Ukraine. Thank you, Julia, for being with us and for making this event happening. Today, we are going to have as a moderator our executive director for Aspen Institute Mexico, who as well happens to be a former undersecretary of state, or we also call it foreign relations for Mexico, and as well ambassador in several countries representing Mexico, and ambassador of Mexico to the UN. So Enrique, I think you have all the experience needed to handle and moderate this important panel. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you for the introduction. Julia, perhaps before we start, you want to say a few words and then we kick it off?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Enrique, for having us today. It's a big pleasure for us to be really close to you. I was in our Aspen family, and during all this days, we count days, weeks of war, like full-scale war, we feel there's like incredible support from our partners from around the globe. So I will just start with some introductory remarks, and I just want to share that what we are experiencing now, it's really independence war for Ukraine, but it's also fight for global freedom and human values, as we just discussed in the beginning. So that's a cruel, bloody war. It takes people's life. It destroys families. The children are getting killed. The enemy rapes our women and kids. They send our people by force to Russia. They deport them, and like, of course, recording how they save them for their propaganda TV shows. They destroy like homes and demolish whole cities, like Mariupol, Volnovakha, from the city where like our administrative director is, Kharkiv. You saw these pictures of Kiev cities like nearby, Bucha, Irpin. But our spirit, all of us, we stay strong. Ukrainians are very united and mobilized in this fight for freedom. Ukrainians shows incredible level of resilience. Uh, you know, uh, as for me, during like first day, especially, I was trying to understand and to find solutions, like to find explanations, what's going on, and what is the essence of this war. And at this moment, especially after information from Bucha, which you probably have seen in your news because it was quite uh, publicly shared, became public, like my understanding of this war became simple and clear. So it's a war against humanistic, democratic, and liberal societies, where Ukraine is just a first target. And like it's the first target, and in a way, how Russia execute their neo-colonialistic, their imperialistic strategy. So you probably seen as this publication in RIA Novosti, where the strategy of denazification of Ukraine has been detailed. And for me, it sounds literally like a plan of genocide. That's what we've seen in Bucha. It's not an exit of execution, but it's a detailed like plan with logic, with structured orders. And what is understandable that Ukraine, that this plan could be applied to any society, like after like rejecting the request to transfer the sovereignty of the country to Kremlin. And we, as like in this process of defending Ukraine and fighting for this democratic order of the world, we are very glad and very grateful that all our friends around the world, all our friends in Europe, in other countries, also have similar understanding of that war and do provide increasing support to Ukraine and its people. And I'm very grateful to our partners in Mexico for the support, for like staying in touch, for like having events, and especially hosting this event today. We have three main goals for this event today, and I'm finished with that and pass it to our wonderful moderator today. So we would like to tell you our stories through the prominent three speakers we have today, all our Aspen alumni. We would like to listen to your questions, so it's important to have this interactive part. Second part, any ideas or comments would be very much appreciated. And also we hope to find new friends who will stand with Ukraine in this fight for European peace and world's democracy. So I will stop here. I'm very grateful for having this event today with Aspen, Mexico, and Enrique, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julia. And I'm very happy to see you well, alive, kicking, and as vital as you always been. So it's great to see you, even if it's through these means. I would like to start for clarity for Mexicans in general, start from the beginning. And the beginning is what is it that sparked this war? What ignited, what triggered this war? The offensive started on the 24th of February, but we would like to understand and see your perspective on your analysis on why is it that Moscow decided to wage war on Ukraine? What are the rationale? What is the rationale, the end game that they have? I don't know, perhaps Gennady, you want to start kicking some ideas on this, on your understanding of the origins of this war.
Thank you, Enrique. First of all, of course, I prefer to speak with my colleagues and friends from Mexico about the business, not about the war. But unfortunately, we are living in absolutely different situation. When we are waking up and go to sleep with only one thought. So when this war is finished, when our families joined. For me and for many of Ukrainian, the day 24 of February is a start of attraction, world attraction to the situation in Ukraine. For this war started not 24 of February 2022, 8 years ago. And I would like to better understand, I was born in Donetsk, I lived in Donetsk, I studied in Donetsk, and only last nearby 8 years, I live and work in Kiev. And for me, this war, starting 8 years ago, has a very personal phase. What I mean, it's, for me, this war came in my family very specifically. Can you imagine, I asking you, many of Mexican, for example, what you can say about the situation when you during 8 years, you lost third house. Third house. First house was my boss and business was in Donetsk. In 2014, I cut in any connection with my business, with my house. I forgot about everything. In the first week of March, I lost my house. It's a region 30 kilometers from the Bucha, where it was one of the most difficult situations of the war, at the beginning of this war. And where I lost my second house. And third, my house was I lost in 2 weeks ago when I took my mother, 85 years, from the region on the north of the Donetsk region. Do you understand? For me, it's a terrible situation, but I'm not only alone. In my country, in our country, it's when the millions of people, the same situation. And these millions of Ukrainians asking, what is it and why? We took territory, we forget to return some money, or what is it? What is it? Why one of the biggest country in the world by territory, one of the biggest country from the military sense, according to some statistics, it's in the 10 of the biggest, or maybe 7 of biggest of economy in the world, and in Europe, one of the biggest. And Ukraine, it's not the a country with some big big population, etc. But country very normal, very European, and very country with his history. And we know we have big challenges, what to do, etc. And I would like to explain this challenge for many millions. It's from my point of view, and many historians said this is true, when during 2-3 weeks, our country, more than 4.5 million people left our country to the Europe. Most of them women with children. This is an incredible situation. and more than 7 million people displaced from the eastern part and south part to the another western part of Ukraine, etc. It means more, in general, it's more than 25% of population of Ukraine change the house, change the situation. And this is very non-understandable for many of people. Why? Again, I would like to ask why. One more question. It's, of course, I'm a person who represents the business. For us, it's very important how it's very difficult for economy. At this time, of course, very difficult to calculate everything very attentively because this is war. But according to our estimations, nearby 30%, 30% of our businesses stopped. You can imagine what is it. And 50% of Ukrainian business working partly. It's very difficult because this is millions of their working place. People, a lot of millions of the Ukrainian small and medium-sized business who had their dreams. They had dreams to make more bigger their business, to travel, to increase families, etc. And now everything is stopped. I would like to share with you just what's my personal attitude to this during what I started to in the beginning to say what's for my family. This is similar for millions and millions of Ukrainians, and this is 21st century. We are in practically the center of Europe. We are in the world where everything is possible, where we have a big international organization like United Nations, some Council, etc. We believe what this organization in such types of the dramatic situation can stop, but we see the situation, the war continuing, practically the second month. We see that nobody in the world can stop aggression of Russia and this regime, and we see this everything became more tension and tension. What will be, how it will be? Of course, Andrei Zagorodnyuk, he is one of the most important expert in the military side. But from my point of view, like a person who made a lot of in the business, this is a very strange situation, but for us very clear. Ukrainian became, due to the base situation, more, if I can say, stronger, unique, and due to this situation, if I can say, like in the what we became more stronger like a nation, and that very important. We have a queue to the army, people who would like to protect their country, and most important. People would like to not only stop, but we would like to feel to demonstrate what Ukraine is a nation with a big future, with a future in the not only in Europe, in the world. And thank you very much, of course, for such type of expression, because Mexico, of course, is very far. But we are very much desire what Mexican better understand the situation with Ukraine. It's not only a question for the war between Ukraine and Russia. This is a huge question to all the world, and we needed to find the right solutions to protect the situation in Ukraine, but also to protect any more, not repeat this situation in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. I understand that that Andrei has some time restrictions, so we'll take advantage of his presence while he's here. What is your assessment, Andrei, on the origins of this war? Why now? I mean, Gennady already told us that it actually started in 2014, which I agree, but why say it's now worse than that invasion into Crimea some 8 years ago? What is the roots of this war, Andrei? What is the end game of Moscow in this? What do they want?
Okay, so let me explain from the start. So the current Russian government has a certain vision for its role in the world, and this vision is based on the fact that they building their own kind of a country, their own sort of with their own ideas, and the way they see that country around them, they need to be essentially either enemies or they should be dependents. So Ukraine is, and basically they consider the geopolitical space in Europe as a sort of a fight between the West and Russia. So they consider West as a sort of geopolitical competitor in all fields, and for some reason they obviously consider this as a not a chances for collaboration or chances for cooperation, but the rivalry and hostility and so sort of a war in the different domains, not necessarily kinetic, not necessarily like with military means, but with all others. So for all these years, Russia has been cultivating inside itself and outside this feeling of the hostility to the Western world, feeling of the competition, and the feeling that Western world creates some sort of a threat for Russia, which of course is not the case. I mean, the Western world is mainly concerned about like building its own prosperity, securing its businesses and economies and so on. And of course, and no military strategy of a single country had Russia as some sort of a target. And obviously NATO was for Russia always as a threat, as they said. However, despite the fact that in none of the NATO strategies ever Russia was considered as a target either. Ukraine some time ago decided to become fully integrated into the international democratic space, politically, economically, which was based on Ukrainians' understanding of the values in which and the type of the country which we want to live in. We want to live in a country where there is a rule of law. We want to live in a country where we can freely elect our government. We want to live in a country where there is like respect to individuals and so on. So coincidentally, those visions and values, they correspond to the values of Europe, and that's why most of the Ukrainians started to support the idea that we should be more integrated in Europe and more integrated into the European space, both from economical, political, cultural, and all other aspects. Russia considered that as unacceptable. Russia considered that Ukraine has to be a Russian dependent state, something where Russia can impose its policies, impose its governments, and impose its way of living and way of governing. And essentially, Russia decided that even if Ukrainians don't disagree with that, this is they still would want to sort of push that agenda onto Ukraine. They did a very similar type of arrangement with Belarus, where Belarus president have essentially turned the Belarus into the colony of Russia, where Russia has most of the huge influence on all sides of life, including military and security, and where essentially Belarus president, as we currently speak, so-called president, because we don't recognize him after he was quite violent in his elections, and we as the rest of Europe don't think that these elections are legitimate, of course. But that person has became fully dependent on Russia, and essentially like he has no independent foreign policy, no independent any policy whatsoever. So Russia wanted to turn us into something like that, and Ukrainians are absolutely different. Ukrainians are a free, loving nation. Ukraine is a nation.
Andrei, let me stop you just for a second.
Yeah.
Just to understand the same sort of pattern that they have followed with Belarus, they want to do it with Ukraine.
I'm not saying it should be the same. I'm saying that the result which they want, is a dependent nation. Yeah, so it's a nation which has no freedom outside of Russia influence. The point is that Ukraine has totally different Ukrainians, and Ukraine as a country and Ukrainian people and civil society have a total different opinion about that. And we're not considering that after 30 years of independence, where most of the people, active population, and grew up or were born or realized themselves as the professionals and the individuals and so on under the in independent Ukraine. We don't even consider for a second that for some reason, because some dictator somewhere else decided that we should no longer be a free nation and we should no longer be an independent nation. It's just completely inconceivable, and we are, as any other independent nation, and I'm sure Mexico would be do the same. As any other independent nation, we want to remain independent because this is the way we think of themselves, and this is the natural way of developing the country. Particularly if that independence also connects it with freedoms and with the democratic values and with the way we want to live. And we want to live as a democratic nation, as I said, and there is absolutely no compromise on that. So when that became clear, Putin started the war in 2014, and he wanted to break the country. First of all, he occupied Crimea. Secondly, he started a hybrid and a proxy war in a number of the regions, and that didn't pick up, except for one region, which was sadly broken into two parts.
Yeah.
One part was dominated by Russia, where they set up their own government, Actually, they had like two areas there, where they set up their own government, their own whatever military and so on, and they ruled it for all these 8 years. However, the rest of Ukraine had continued to address that security sort of instability and the actual war, which was a different type of intensivity. In 2014, 2015, it was extremely intensive. In 2016, 17, in 16 as well, in 17 less. And then it was like a relatively low intensivity. Relatively, we still were losing people there every few days and so on. But Ukraine itself was developing, and the economy was developing, and the political alliances were developing. We were more integrating into European Union. We were more integrating into NATO. We were more, and so Ukraine was becoming stronger and stronger. And then at some point of time, apparently, Putin decided that it's time to act. Why he selected that specific time, it's another story, because partly it was explained because of his own agenda. Partly it was explained because of the political situation around Ukraine. There were a number of elections in different countries. So basically he has chosen that sort of time from a geopolitical construct, whatever the way he thought of a thought. And he started to assemble troops around our borders in November 2000. Actually, it started a year ago, but then he sort of tested the water, and then he started to assemble troops seriously in November 2021. And as we all know, in the end of February, he started a full-scale invasion to Ukraine. So that's a real war. That's a real war with all types of forces involved: land, navy, aviation, special operation forces, and everything. That's a war which is extremely intense right now. This is a war which is, by amount of troops involved and by casualties already, about material losses, it's certainly largest war in Europe, and perhaps even more than Europe, in maybe Eastern Hemisphere since World War II. It's already that. It's a war where hundreds of thousands of soldiers participate. It's a war where Russians already lost over 20,000 soldiers, which is extremely high, comparing even to the wars they had before. That's higher than, for example, a war in Afghanistan, if we break it into years, because it was about, as our estimations, about 15,000 a year, and they already have more than 20,000, and that's just lost in battle. But there's also wounded soldiers and so on. The war created a horrible economic losses, unimaginable humanitarian suffering, and it's extreme. And Russians are behaving extremely cruelly. It's something which is unspeakable for countries which live in a sort of used to live in a peaceful European kind of democratic developed world. They indeed they destroy cities, they bomb cities to the ground, they terrorize civilian population in all imaginable forms. You know, doing all kinds of things which are like there's a huge record already of the crimes against humanity and the war crimes. So
right now, Andrei, right now, are they focusing, as they said, from Moscow on the east, on south of Ukraine, or it's a widespread war right now all over the country?
The end game, answering your question, the end game was to destroy Ukraine as a country completely. So that was the end game. That end game obviously isn't working for them. They overestimated their power and they underestimated Ukrainian capabilities. So right now they wanted to take Ukraine and a number of regions within a few days. So the original plan was that the war would last like several days, essentially like a week or something. That didn't work out completely. So they haven't achieved anything in a week. They haven't achieved anything in a month. They accept that they destroyed lots of areas in Ukraine like completely. Then they switched to a different plan. They tried to capture several cities. That also didn't work out. Then they switched to the terrorizing by bombing, and they started to bomb cities, including the cities which are far from front lines, like in the Western Ukraine and any places, any locations. Then they started to terrorize civilian population like terribly, as we know from the news. Most likely you've seen it. And finally, when that wall didn't coerce Ukrainians, like Ukrainian will to fight didn't diminish at all. It's actually even become stronger and stronger, and so on. They finally decided to focus on at least some regions in order to sort of fix some kind of achievement somewhere.
So would you say that as of now the strategy is to have like a corridor on the east of Ukraine?
They look at the South Ukraine. They, in ideal world for them, they want to take the whole south. That will be difficult to the level of impossible, most likely. So they at least will take south. I mean, they want to, and of course we're challenging them on that way. And from Crimea to Russia. So essentially, this is like some sort of what they call a land corridor between Crimea and Russia. And then they want to occupy additional areas of Donbass, like the eastern Ukraine. There is no particular strategic meaning for that. It's essentially that's an idea to show some sort of acquisition of the territory, just because they want to at least to report that they can achieve they can do some, like, deliver some operational objectives. It depending on the outcome of that campaign, they would then think about what else. If they come to that campaign with some capabilities. So of course Ukrainian forces are very strong, way more stronger than they expected. So they have, as I said, severe losses on the way. So we will see how it ends. But obviously we're intended to make this the worst experience for them, imaginable. But then yes, then so they try to block those areas and kind of capture those areas and the two more things which need to you need to understand is that this is all is the war 8 years, which they started 8 years ago, was also followed by massive information operations. They put a lot of investments, a lot of capabilities into trying to explain why they're doing this. So the international leaders decide that this is a sort of legitimate operation 8 years ago, and indeed they succeeded in a lot of the areas. And many European politicians, for example, they were kind of trying to explain why Russia is doing, but more importantly, they try to find ways how to deal with Russia, like economically and so on. They tried to do the same with this war, but because it was completely unprovoked, because it's completely unexplainable from international law perspective, and particularly because it's followed by all these atrocities and terror, they find it's obviously failed. And in the Western space, like in European, American, and Northern America, sort of information space, people are very clearly understanding that Putin is a war criminal, and what he's doing doesn't make much sense. But in some regions, like Middle East, like India, for example, they still try to dominate the information space, and they still try to push their narratives. And the narratives are like they're fighting against some Nazis or something like that, which doesn't make any sense, because there are no such thing in Ukraine. But they're kind of bringing up all these explanations, trying to explain why they're doing this, and they totally dominate the information space in Russia. So Russia is they shut off all the independent channels, whatever the independent they were. They shut them down. So they criminalize the unacceptance of that war for Russians. So if you are Russian citizen and you are against the war, you're criminal straight away. And they are doing a massive information, like a propaganda campaign in Russia itself. So as a result, Russian people don't understand how many people they lose. They don't understand what the terrible losses are for Russia for this, and lots of them actually support. Actually, majority support that war. So for us,
some people in Russia, and they are already, I mean, regardless of the misinformation, they're noticing that something is going wrong.
Yeah, of course.
Banks are not open. You cannot have access to a number of international transactions.
Yeah.
You cannot fly out of Russia to the West. So people are realizing that something is going on.
While they're realizing that, Russian government is investing huge resources to support the capabilities which fight with Ukraine. We're talking about tens of thousands of soldiers on every specific operational directive, which means that altogether it's about close to 200,000 troops involved. And obviously we're talking about thousands of units of artillery, tanks, and planes, and so on. We do believe that, interestingly, and to surprisingly to many analysts around the world, particularly in the Western world, Russian army is very ineffective, and it's actually not that strong. And we found that that numbers are actually not that important as efficiency. So Ukrainian army, which was preparing for 8 years and had a battlefield experience, but also reforming and also embracing some of the NATO standards and generally the new kind of ways of doing war, and being much more based on the democratic sort of approaches, democratic countries' approaches. It became way more efficient than Russia. So of course they have more troops, they have more planes and more tanks. Actually, not the case anymore, but they had. But at the same time, they were extremely inefficient, and so they're throwing their 20, 21, 22-year-old often conscripts, which means that they were like pulled mandatory military service. They were pulled from the civilian life to the army, and then they're thrown to Ukraine to die. And this is, of course, it's immoral in its own way, but that also tells us that in many areas Russians are failing, and most of the areas actually they're failing. And so they had to leave from Kiev, from essentially from all northern Ukraine. They had to go. They obviously are reshifting now their forces to the east, but at the same time they tried to take north and they failed. And as we can see, they can fail. They still tried to take some other cities and failed as well. And what we believe absolutely seriously, absolutely clearly, that Russia is going to lose that war. Particularly because we have a unanimous support of the Western nations in supporting us with the capabilities, with the equipment, with the weapons, and so on. We're having a very good progress with the negotiations and discussions with key allies like US, like Canada, UK, and so on, and some continental European nations. Even France, which was always like more tolerant to Russia, is already decided to supply us weapons. Even Germany. So with that, we understand that we will have a critical mass of the equipment and weapons in order to turn that into the counteroffensive. And so obviously Russia is going to fail, like dramatically, in this whole thing. And even if they retreat from Ukraine, nothing can be done to undo the war crimes which they did.
Yes.
So you know, those atrocities which we have seen, they will be responsible for that, and we will make sure that that comes very quickly. So that's what this more or less situation where it is right now.
Yeah, tremendous, very interesting explanation, Andrei. Thank you very much. Natalie, I would like to turn to you. Sorry for leaving you at the end. I think we just took the trend of understanding through Andrei the military implications and all the political motives of the Russians mostly. But I would like to turn now into the future, if you will. How do you perceive, or what elements they should have a ceasefire first, and perhaps a solution to this conflict? What elements should be on the table, and how you see things? I don't know whether the meetings and talks in Turkey have some effect on all this, are evolving properly. How do you see the near future, say, how to end this conflict?
In my personal view, the only way to end the conflict is for Ukraine to prevail on the military side. That doesn't mean that there's not a diplomatic solution possible, but there is no diplomatic solution in my mind possible until Ukraine has the leverage of walking into that negotiation, having prevailed on in the physical military fight. That's why arming Ukraine now with the arms that it needs to prevail in this war, in my mind, is the absolute number one issue. The number two issue from my perspective, and it's come up in some of the Q&A, I've been trying to answer some of the Q&A that's been coming up, is what agreement with what party, with what enforcement ability will be acceptable to Ukraine. Ukraine has learned through history that Russia's signature on a piece of paper is not worth the paper it's on. So Russia has signed security assurances in the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, and yet it invaded.
Yes.
We see that the UN Security Council is unable and incapable of implementing or enforcing any decision because Russia, the aggressor, has a veto. So what set of agreement, what can be in this agreement, and what parties need to be a part of any agreement to ensure that peace? Or will there be a ceasefire, an end to the battle, and 2 months later, a rearming, a regrouping, and a reinvasion? So when you see President Zelensky talking about coming to an agreement and demanding security guarantees of a variety of countries, the reason he's asking for security guarantees is because there can be no peace solely with Putin's signature when Putin has clearly abrogated every agreement from the UN Charter to the Budapest Memorandum to the Minsk agreements to the Helsinki Accords to the OSCE to the Geneva Convention. You name it, it's been abrogated. So what and how is an international security framework going to be built that assures not only Ukraine today, but other countries tomorrow, that a nuclear bully or just a very large neighbor with weapons is not going to take advantage of a peaceful neighbor that doesn't have as many weapons and doesn't have nuclear power? And so I think this is going to be the challenge of finding a peace. Ukraine will prevail on the ground. We're all very hopeful, and the world is supporting, the free world is supporting Ukraine to prevail with weapons, to both heavy weapons and air defense.
Now, do you see?
The question is, what happens after that? How do you carve? You're an ambassador. You're a diplomat. How do you reach a sustainable and effective, enforceable agreement on peace?
Right. I mean, first of all, you have to figure out who should be at the table, right? Who are the relevant partners that have to be at the table, and what conditions are going to be played out. But something I don't see very easily, you understand the region much better than I do, is Vladimir Putin just pulling out, defeated and humiliated from the Ukraine. I think that, I don't know if you foresee that. I mean, it's not that you don't want to see that, but I think it's very difficult that the Russians will pull out in defeat. They have to somehow show, especially the Kremlin has to show some sort of victory before they pull out.
I don't think that's an option, Ambassador. And I think we need to stop trying to provide Putin with off ramps. That policy of providing Putin with off ramps has been utilized since he invaded Georgia in 2008. And we keep providing him off ramps, and his appetite grows. It doesn't recede, it grows. So I think we need to stop using the approaches that have enabled him to do what he's done in Chechnya, in Georgia, in Ukraine in 2008, in Syria. We keep providing off ramps, and his appetite's growing. So I think this is about not necessarily looking for him for an off ramp, but instead isolating his economy with sanctions, with export controls, and putting both the population and the elite, political and economic elite, into a position where they understand that they cannot continue this war. They're losing on the battlefield, and they are going to be losing economically in a way that they have to change what to them is success.
Yeah, no, well, I agree. I mean, you cannot just appease the bully and try to change behavior just by giving them little pieces of whatever they want to achieve. That's for sure. My thinking is on perhaps on a psychological type of view, how somebody like him who's been in power for 20 years, right, and wants to stay in power until 2036, right? How they're gonna take it and how the reaction. And actually, I'm trying to narrow this to the nuclear issue. I mean, if effectively the nuclear issue could be on the table, because that's very dangerous for the world at large, right? The largest nuclear weapon nation in the world, using them not for appeasement or for deterrence, but for offensive purposes. That would be a first in the world. So, I mean, he would go down in history, and he may go down in history anyway, as in a very poor note. But regardless of that, I mean, here we are. I mean, that they have that capability, right? So how are we going to deal with this in terms of seeing him in a corner, how he may react in a more aggressive manner and perhaps more irresponsible or daring or cruel manner than he has done so far. So that's my fear. I'm not saying that we should appease him. I think that nobody wants to play the Chamberlain the card today, right? That's what basically you're saying, and I agree with that.
I hope you're right. I hope no one wants to play the Chamberlain card. But what we do see is many companies, for example, playing that quote Chamberlain card, continuing to do business in Russia, continuing to pay taxes in Russia. Clearly that those taxes are being collected and used to finance and fund the war, finance and fund the war crimes, finance and fund the war criminals. They're not being used for development of the eastern part of Russia, roads, schools. Take a look at what you see outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg in terms of the development of the Russian country. It's not being used for the economy. It's not being used for education. So every company that has made the choice to stay in Russia today, to continue to pay taxes, to continue to finance, is acting like a Chamberlain in its own way. In its own way.
Yes, you're right. And now turning into the origins, or some of the origins of all this, of Ukraine joining NATO and joining the European Union. Anybody, I mean, I don't know whether Gennady wants to jump in, or Andrei, or you yourself, Natalie. Is that out of the table that that Ukraine will join NATO or not, or how are things moving now?
I won't speak specifically to NATO. I'll leave that for Andrei to talk about. But I wanted to make a point earlier, which is that one of the reasons this is happening now, I mean, there are many reasons. Andrei mentioned many of them. In my belief, one of them is because Ukraine is showing that it can be successful. Over the last 8 years, notwithstanding an ongoing war in Donbass and the illegal occupation and annexation of Crimea, Ukraine's economy was growing. Ukraine's middle class was becoming stronger. Ukraine's IT community was becoming one of the best in the world. Ukraine had enjoyed freedoms that Russians don't enjoy: freedoms of speech, freedoms of media, freedom of religion, freedom of sexual orientation. All of this was happening in the next door neighbor, which is part of his imperial mythology. And he had, I think, every day to face that with each day, Ukraine was becoming a stronger, independent, Slavic, free, democracy. Ukraine's democracy is not without problems. Ukraine's rule of law system is not without problems. We suffer from corruption. We still have an enormous amount of work and reform to do. But what we have is an incredibly active civil society, and the country continues to get better, continues to move forward on this path. And I think to a large extent, for Putin, when you ask why now? Why now? Because with every day, Ukraine's military, its society, its economy, its business community, its agricultural sector, its IT communities, all are getting stronger and stronger. And so I think from my perspective, becoming a member of the European Union is absolutely in the cards. It is for all the reasons I've mentioned. We are an incredibly important economic part of Europe. We have now shown that we live and die by the values of the European Union. We said that in 2014. We're living it 8 years later. And I think that NATO is a question that is, in my opinion, flipped upside down. NATO ought to want Ukraine now. Ukraine is the single country in the world that has had direct combat and successful combat experience with Russia. So I'll leave the rest of the NATO question to Andriy.
Thank you. It's difficult to answer because Natalia said it so well that essentially I obviously agree. And I do believe that European Union question is a matter of time because indeed it goes well. And from what I'm hearing from different friends in political sort of worlds of different continental European countries, there is a great chance right now. Regarding NATO, we need to understand a few things. So first of all, NATO needs to reinvent itself after this war because NATO as a headquarters, like located in Brussels, essentially failed to adequately address that problem. We've been telling about this problem. I was speaking to NATO, including the General Secretary myself in 2019, for example, and warning about the threats in Black Sea. And that's one of the domains where the war happens. We were talking about creating a strategy for the Black Sea, creating an adequate solution to the Black Sea. We flagged the Russian ambitions in the Black Sea, and not much has been done. Well, not actually, nothing has been done, if to be precise. So NATO need to recall that they were created in order to protect democratic world from the Soviet Union. That was the original reason why they were created. And Russia obviously is considering itself as a continuation of the Soviet Union, and not just from ideological and cultural perspective, which they exploit like heavily and to the kind of a weird extent, but also as a sort of imperialist ambitions, and certainly not a free country, not the slightest, you know. So NATO essentially in latest memorandums and latest like communiques like for the last years was repeating that Russia is a strategic threat. So now what do we see? We see some countries supporting Ukraine. We see some countries investing billions, literally, into support of Ukraine, and we very grateful, of course. They understand the strategic importance of this war. They understand that this is not a local conflict, no way, and they understand that there is no single credible explanation why that conflict took place in the first place. So there is like there hasn't been any ethnical conflict, religious conflict, whatever else you sometimes see as a sort of foundation for the wars in their other parts of the world. There was no such thing. So it's just a purely made up story which was sold to the people, and then they started. So the only reason for that conflict was geopolitical, because one of the dictators decided that he wants to spread his power to the other country. That's it. That was it. NATO as an organization has to understand how effectively it can work against this, because right now we don't see that efficiency. Apart from NATO countries, as I said, that sort of uniting power of NATO needs to step up. And indeed, we are as a country which takes all the hit on ourselves, and we can certainly contribute. And that contribution is already being valued a lot, because unlike Ukraine, many NATO countries can be severely hit by Russia, and some of them can be occupied in one day. And I'm talking about Baltic nations, for example.
Oh yeah,
example. So they can take any of these countries literally in one day, and then NATO would be deciding what it's going to do and doing consultations and whatever else is written in this charter. So they do need to reassess themselves. And yeah, and I'm sure that we will be very helpful in that as a member of NATO, because we're not changing our constitution where it's said that we become a member. And I think that after this war, we will see a new assessment of the security architecture and how countries respond to these threats like that. So it's much bigger than Ukrainian participation in NATO.
If I can, yes.
Go ahead, Gennady.
Yeah, very two remarks. From my point of view, of course, I'm not a military man. I'm a businessman. Putin did and continue to do the same mistakes by mistakes. His decision became more worse and worse. What I mean, in the beginning, if more or less understand his logic, he would like to stop Ukraine on the way to the NATO. Due to this war, two more countries would like to come to join NATO. His neighbor, Finland and Sweden. What is it? You understand? And most next, during to the 2 months of war, the quantity of the population of Ukrainians who would like to join European Union and NATO increased dramatically. We now practically 70–80% of population would like to be the part of this. In the beginning, it was less, yes, of course. Now people would like to join this population. Next, and third one, if he will continue, more and more countries will be against, but not only votes. Like all votes visited many leaders of Europe. For example, the leader of the United Kingdom after the visit said what Ukraine can to United Kingdom ready to support in any dramatical situation of Ukraine. This is some signs. Mr. Putin did something and get worse situation. This is for him. It's
he's getting the opposite result of what he was looking for at the beginning.
And he will continue. He will get more worse and worse results. This is for him. It became the situation worse and worse, and for Russia as well.
Yeah, he wanted to drive a wedge in the European Union. For instance, now the European Union is more united than ever, at least in this endeavor. So, I mean, he's actually absolutely agree with you. Finally, how do you see this? I mean, from the war effort point of view, the sanctions. Perhaps you want to address this, Natalie. Are the sanctions sufficient? You mentioned that weapons are also needed, of course, but how would the world help in a most efficient manner Ukraine at this stage?
So I think that the sanctions are not sufficient. If they were sufficient, the war would be over, and the war is not. As long as we have not used all of the sanction tools that we have and the war continues, it means, in my mind, we need to apply them. Number one, in the banking sphere, we have sanctioned a handful of the larger banks, but there are still too many ways to get around that, and the banking system is still functioning in Russia for the people of Russia, for the business community of Russia. So we need to sanction all of the banks and remove them from SWIFT, all, without exception. Second, we need to sanction the transportation and logistics companies. We've sanctioned a small number of them, so have Complot and others. And the reason we need to sanction those companies is to make it more difficult for them to trade with countries who are not abiding by sanctions, India, China, and so on. We need to make those companies face financial difficulties to continue their business. Export controls are working. They're slow, but export controls are working in robbing the Russian defense industry in particular of key elements which cannot be supplied by China. So there are key technological elements that cannot be supplied by China that make them unable to produce, for example, precision missiles at this point. So on the sanctions side, there's quite a bit more that can be done as well on the individuals, both the individuals in the political elite as well as the economic elite and their families. If Russians are not allowing Ukrainians to breathe the air of freedom, there's no reason why the families of those people implementing the policies ought to be breathing the air of freedom in New York, London, or elsewhere. Their visas should be canceled, and they should be living in Russia. They should be living in Russia, in the country where they're from. If they will not allow Ukrainians to breathe free air, then they should not be able to breathe our free air as well. So I argue for a much deeper set of sanctions across businesses, banking, logistics, transport, and then finally, we need to stop the purchase of oil and gas. Now, I am fully cognizant of the fact that not everything can be done in one day. However, there needs to be a clear plan. Oil, in particular, European Union oil purchases, can be cut off this week. They could be cut off this week. Yes, oil prices are rising, but the long-term cost of this war is going to be greater for the entire world than any increase in cost of oil today. And oil can be replaced with other oil. Gas is harder, but the plan has to be put in place to accelerate moving away from gas today. If the European Union is purchasing more or less $700 million a day in oil and gas, they are financing this war. They are annulling the value of the other sanctions because they're providing hard currency into that economy to support the ruble. So there is still quite a bit that we can do. And then the last one that I'll add is self-sanctioning of businesses. I'll remind everyone again, given the world that we live in today, given the importance of ESG principles, corporate social responsibility, there is zero argument for continuing to do business in Russia, for continuing to pay taxes, whether it's Citibank that continues both its consumer finance and corporate finance, or whether it is trading companies who continue to trade and sell Russian oil and gas, or whether it is manufacturers in Italy like Pirelli, tire manufacturer. It doesn't matter which company it is. There is no logic, no financial, no reputational, no moral ability to continue to pay taxes to finance the war crimes. And so bottom line, quite a bit more we can do on sanctions across all oil and gas purchases, sanctioning banks and logistics transportation companies, continue the export controls, broaden the group of individuals, and self-sanction as businesses out of the Russian market.
Yeah, well, you said it, and Andrei also said it a little while ago, that this is not a local conflict from the start, actually, because it has had international global implications right from the beginning. I was reading today that the Bundesbank in Germany estimates that the German economy may drop by 5% by not purchasing gas from Russia, while they substitute it somehow or find another supplier in the world. So this is becoming, I think, what is going to happen and will help the Ukrainian cause, I think, is that the world will start to get fed up with this war and its implications in the world. So I think that will help the cause of peace. Perhaps I'm too optimistic on this, but I think that feding up of the world on the implications of an invasion like this will actually hurt Russia more in the near future.
I don't think, Ambassador, that the world has fully understood the long-term implications of this war. People think of this as a faraway war somewhere in Ukraine, but this is a war that's going to cause not only oil and gas prices to go up globally, but food prices. There's a lot of discussion of not only food prices, but an absence of food in certain markets is going to cause a new and incremental migrant problem for Europe
and
from Northern Africa.
Inflation worldwide.
Inflation worldwide. Think about the cost to, again, our non-proliferation efforts globally, whether it be with Northern Korea, whether it be with Iran, whether it be with other countries. No one will have any credibility to negotiate any agreement on non-proliferation after this. Think about the cost to democracies globally and to our belief in our own international organizations that have failed us, whether it's the UN Security Council, OSCE, or others. Andrei mentioned NATO's going to have to rethink itself. All of the international structures are going to have to rethink how they function, how they can provide for the peace that they have promised the world. Yeah. There are military issues. Will we allow nuclear countries to blackmail us?
Right.
If the next one is North Korea, what will we do? Because he has nuclear weapons, we know. We're just going to say, go ahead. So I think that there are economic, political, there are military, there are huge costs, huge repercussions. And so when Germany says it's going to cost too much to stop using gas, I urge them to think about what the cost is. of this war continuing, and all of these other issues are much, much more costly.
Yeah, in the long run, absolutely. I mean, if the stronger militarily will vanquish and obliterate the weaker, I mean, this is an endless thing in the world. So this is a precedent that we cannot accept anywhere in the world. So I think that what is being played out in Ukraine is the future of international relations as such. I think it's very important that, as you said, Natalie, a while ago, that actually Ukraine prevails in the face of a very unfair and unprovoked war. So, Andrei, you wanted to take the floor a while ago.
Yeah, I just wanted two remarks. So first of all, for the companies which still continue doing business in Russia, the time when that becomes illegal and the time and the point when they will have to leave is just a matter of time, because I'm not a specialist in sanctions, but I talk to lots of them who actually currently working a lot on those, and more sanctions will be coming. So I know that there are some companies which try to take advantage, and when some companies leave, the other ones are taking their place in the market and try to actually even grow sales and continue doing with Russia, explaining this with the necessity to build value for shareholders and so on and so on. These companies need to realize that they actually, in the long run, destroying the value of the shareholders, because while they're making investments on growth in Russia, it's just a matter of time when they will also have to leave. And because there is nothing can be explained, like there's no way, Putin can undo all these atrocities. And if, for example, it is completely inconceivable for any Western company to deal in Syria or with North Korea, if you deal with Syria and with North Korea, you're no longer dealing with Western world. That's it. It's very clear. So the same thing would be with Russia, because what Putin is doing is very similar, or just on a larger scale, what Assad regime was doing in Syria. Actually, they were doing this together, as we know. So it's just like these businesses has to be a little bit more long-term thinking, and not getting themselves into a position where they shoot themselves in the foot by actually expanding in Russia. Well, then they will have to leave when the sanctions actually get tighter and tighter. And as I say, this is just a matter of time. And the second one is that we need to consider that if somebody creates somebody commits war crimes of that scale, and that person runs the country. That country should not be considerable as normal for business as usual. That's it. So you cannot use Western resources, Western finances, Western lines of business, and at the same time try to destroy the world order, which is built on international law, which is built on Western principles. So it's just like these two things don't go together well, and like at all. I mean, they contradict, and the world needs to understand that. I'm sure we're on the right track, because what I see right now is more and more countries implying more and more sanctions, and I think there will be a very clear distinction. So the war criminal running the state goes in the area where nobody should deal with those people. That's it.
I'll just
Thanks.
add that the Russians are making it more difficult as we speak. So the party in power, United Russia, has proposed legislation that any company that continues to do business in Russia and applies the sanctions. So for example, Citibank is applying the banking sanctions and operating between and amongst those sanctions. That proposed law will make it criminal for parties at Citi to implement sanctions on the territory of Russia. They are making it such that those companies who think they can swim between the sanctions will be facing criminal responsibility for the application and implementation of the sanctions. So they're going to accelerate it anyway. That means that every company, including Mexican companies, ladies and gentlemen, need to take that decision today and do it for their own reputation, for their own bottom line, because they're going to be pushed out anyway.
One of the problems, say historically, about sanctions is that they take a long time to have an effect. These may be a bit different because they have been unprecedented in many ways. I mean, the way they are being applied to Russia, they were not applied to South Africa during the apartheid, or they were applied to Sudan or places like that.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's been a bit different. May have a different effect on Russia. But I don't know whether that will be sufficient medicine in order to change the course of war as of now. I don't think so. I think that they have well, you, Andrei, mentioned it a while ago, that they have a strategic sort of a mental frame, what they want to achieve, right?
Well,
They may
yes,
not change course regardless.
but not necessarily. So any system, and that includes military system, as strong as its weakest link. So so it's not like if you have like 10 tanks but just 2 drivers, it means that you have 2 tanks. So same thing works with capabilities, with military capabilities. Russia does not have endless capabilities, and we see that already with our own eyes on when our colleagues are currently on the front line. So they're not invincible. They're not like and their resources are not endless, and we see that because they're bringing more and more less qualified power to the front. They're bringing conscripts, as I said. They're bringing some reservists, which have no idea how to fight. They're running out of the expensive missiles. They're running out of the high quality equipment, and so on. So actually,
microchips, for instance, microchips to
yeah. So all that shows that, and then there are people who study that professionally, and we keep in touch with them. They constantly showing that this sort of Russian military power is not endless. So the end of this war is not like in 10 years, and it's not even like in 5 years. It can happen much quicker if the world is united with Ukraine. So we're not talking about something which is like huge, massive, unconceivable sort of a power. No, it's not the case. So yeah, that just so you know. So sanctions do work because Russian resources are not endless. Thank you.
Yeah, we have to take the lessons of all this for the future. And Natalie has mentioned something that is of the essence, which is how agreements will be abide to in the future. I mean, is there any means by which agreements can be implemented and forced and get into force or not? That is one of the main things for the future, especially for those, say, countries that like to proceed or go around the international law, right? We have a number of them in the world. So this is a very important precedent that has been set. I, for one, I mean, I have lots of more questions. One of them, perhaps we can end with this on war crimes, right? I mean, I think that regardless of the veto at the Security Council, there are other tools, International Court of Justice and International Penal Court and so on and so forth, that could actually get into these issues. I mean, because when you see criminality of this nature, as we saw in Bucha, you call it Bucha or Bucha? Excuse me?
Bucha.
Bucha with a CH, right?
Yeah.
Bucha. When you see things like that, you cannot just let them go. I mean, because that actually escalates naturally in terms of cruelty, in terms of savagery. So I think that, I don't know if you or Ukraine is pursuing that line, because it's another source of pressure, right, to have the legal system on top of these guys.
We absolutely are pursuing it. In fact, we've already won a very important decision of the International Court of Justice. I put it into the chat there, and they've ordered Russia to immediately suspend its military operations because of that original decision. But that said, we all know, again, how easy, and I'm being quite cynical here, it is to enforce the decisions of any international organization on Russia. So right now, Ukraine is working very, very closely with a variety of countries and the ICJ, which is established and named a judge already, on collecting evidence of the war crimes. And that evidence will be then entered into a further process to try and prosecute them to the fullest. But Russia is not a member, does not acknowledge the ICJ as having authority over it. It is a party to a relevant treaty, the Genocide Convention, and that's how Ukraine received that first decision. So this is something that Ukrainians are very, very cognizant of, and will do everything possible to bring to light every single war crime that was conducted against the people of Ukraine, but it will be very hard to enforce.
Now that you mentioned this, Natalie, and let me seriously end with this, I will let Julia and Luis for a minute. But there's some well, information, misinformation, confusion, controversy, however you want to call it, regarding the Russian population that lives in the east of Ukraine, right? Some of the narrative says from
Even
the Russian,
that, Ambassador, they may be Russian speaking, they may not be Russian ethnic. So we have to be very careful because Russia makes everyone who's a Russian speaker into a Russian citizen / ethnicity, and that's not the case. So even that single thing.
no, that's what I wanted you to get into, because we get confused on this side of the world on what does it mean to be of Russian origin or Russian speaker or whatever. I mean, we saw what happened with the so-called referendum in Crimea, no? I mean, so it was a mockery, right? I mean, what happened there? But now, I mean, people, and I say this because some of our audience ask about this, and what happened to the genocide in the Donbass, to the Russian populations living there. So I think it's important for you to address this issue so people in Mexico get your vision and understand what the scenario is.
I'm going to leave it to Lee, and I'm just going to say one quick thing, which is the only true genocide that has happened to Russian speakers has been committed by Russian troops in Mariupol, in Kharkiv, and in eastern Ukraine. Not by the Azov battalion, but by Russian troops in Russian-speaking areas.
Okay.
Lee?
Andrei, you want to say something about this? Please go ahead, please.
Yeah, so if we're going to talk about Russian-speaking population, I'm a Russian-speaking population. So my mother tongue was Russian. I'm still using Russian in family and so on. And I have to tell you, of course, now we in the work we'll speak Ukrainian, but that's because of the choice. It's not like somebody told us. But in the families, we still use Russian language every day. And the thing is that nobody ever told me anything wrong about this, like ever. And I grew up in Kiev. I'm from Kiev myself. I was born in Kiev, grew up in Kiev, and all my classmates were Russian speakers and so on. Many of them, because of what happens, changed to Ukrainian because they just they just want to be closer to Ukrainian culture and so on. But again, that's a voluntary choice. What is more important is that I don't want to argue with Russian propaganda narratives because it just doesn't make sense. What we know, and I don't want, is to be our word against Putin's word, because in this case we're playing his game. Because that's what happens. I'm very often in Arabian channels like Al Jazeera and so on, and they always play that game all the time. And they said, is there something? And then they ask the question, which basically comes from the Russian narrative. And I'm trying to explain that there is no such thing. And they say, well, and previous speaker who was from Moscow, he said this. And then they made us to kind of explain ourselves and essentially like play the game of like us against them. So what I'm going to say is very simple. Ukraine was full of international observers all this time. All this time, there's been people from United States, from Canada, from United Kingdom, from European Union, from Japan, from, I don't know, whatever. Take any free country. Any free country had representatives in Ukraine for all these years. And not a single one ever reported any genocide or any other wrongdoing of Ukrainian government to its own people or any other people, so to speak. Not a single one. So and not by Azov battalion, not by any other battalion. So it is all, if we had that problem would be in the reports of the international community somewhere, and it's not there. So I'm not going even to waste your time on trying to tell you, no, genocide never happened. It's just like
the files, right?
Yeah, exactly. So just it's a total Russian narrative. But what I know is that I have lots of friends who did business in the southern Ukraine, and they saw that, and they said that in Mariupol, for example, that's a city where population had like the last resentment to Russians ever possible. So they half of Mariupol people had Russian connections through the families, through their education, and so on and so on. So if you can find a place where people after 8 years of war were more like kind of not friendly, but sometimes friendly, sometimes less aggressive to Russians, it was actually Mariupol, which they destroyed completely. There is no such city anymore, unfortunately. And so that what you need to know. Thank you. And I need
And
to
just
leave, unfortunately.
one more,
Oh, thank you.
one more
No,
thing.
no,
Just
Julia,
and
Julia, you will have the last word. Yes.
may I comment on this as well?
No, please jump in. Have
I
your
have to say goodbye.
Thank you,
very
Andre.
much.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Andre.
bye.
Has been tremendous.
you.
We learned a lot from you. Thank you very much for being with us.
You.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Just to follow up what Andrei mentioned, because like we found out near Kiev a lot of diaries which were made by soldiers who were like in our like near Kiev as they were occupying the cities. So they are writing there that they expected and they were told they will be greeted in the especially eastern part and in near Kiev. They will be greeted with flowers and Russian flags, and people will welcome them there. And that's another example when you have a quite Russian-speaking, like on the eastern part cities, which were like manifesting against Russians every single day without any arms, just stopping with their hands as tanks, just not because they didn't want it and they don't want to join any like Russian like scenario. So that's it. That's a great example of what really was happening.
Very illustrative, very much so, very much so. Well, we have reached the end of our panel. The time has flown tremendously quickly, and I want to thank you for being here. I mean, it's been tremendous. I will relay to you the results and the responses of people here in Mexico about this panel. Thank you for sharing information firsthand. Keep well, keep safe. Julia will get together, I hope soon, somewhere in the world. And I will I'll give the floor to Luis to finalize with some thoughts and some farewell remarks. Thank you. All the best to you, and keep it up.
Well, thank you for all of this information to understand a little bit more about this conflict. And I just vote for the renewal of world peace as soon as possible, and for the reestablishment of international relations according to international law. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all the people that have joined us to listen to this important event. Thank you.